So, Blake, did you see anything about Tesla's Q3 results? Any headlines? Or did you read anything?
Yeah, I heard everything is great. Tesla's turned it right around and they're completely out of the woods now.
Yeah, they essentially transformed themselves in a single quarter from the least efficient car production company in the world to the most efficient car production company in the world.
Congratulations, Tesla. Or really, Elon
Yes.
Musk. He did it all himself by sleeping in the factory, right?
I've heard that he just walks by your workstation and the issues are just resolved in 10 or 20 minutes. And I always worry about reading stories like that because it's like, I could imagine if my CEO came to my cubicle and offered to resolve some kind of issue I had. First off, they probably would have no idea how to tackle it, which is no dig at my CEO, but they're just not an engineer. But, how much time would they really have to devote to understanding the problem and solving it in a useful way? And so I read the anecdotes about Elon came to my workstation at the Gigafactory, and in 25 minutes, we had whatever resolved. And it's like, was it really resolved? Was it resolved in a good way, a sustainable way that'll work forever, a way that your immediate direct manager will appreciate, and in a way that doesn't just placate Elon Musk until he walks off? And so I really worry about those kind of anecdotes because I'm highly skeptical that someone who knows nothing about your process and the exact job that you do could come into your work area and just fix problems for you like that, unless you're really incompetent.
Maybe it totally works and he goes to their workstation and then he saves the company thousands of dollars over the next few years while costing it millions because he's not making a more important, larger scale decision.
Yeah, that's certainly another consideration. So Tesla reported its Q3 results, I believe, on October 24th, 2018. And then the 10Q report came out on November 1st. And so we're recording this on November 4th. And needless to say, my skepticism at the conference call and the quarterly report to the shareholders necessitated waiting until the 10Q came out. So the 10Q is a SEC filing where the quarterly report, I'm not sure if it's filed with the SEC, but it's certainly not regulated and formulated in the same way. So the quarterly report is more like a cheerleading statement where you get the shareholders pumped up about how good the company's doing. And you report just the summary cash flow statements and income statement and balance sheet. But when you get to the 10Q release, since the SEC has requirements on what goes into that, and it's a much more legally binding document, there's a lot more honesty in the 10Q report than there is in the quarterly shareholder letter and the conference call. So that came out again like Thursday. This is Sunday. And Tesla reported a GAAP net profit for the second quarter of $312 million. So that blew away all the expectations, all of the people who make models, the people who have very good histories of making very accurate models. They were forecasting things maybe in the $100 million range of a profit. And even that was with prodigious use of ZEV credits to help shore things up. So when they reported a $312 million profit, they beat expectations quite a bit. They said that their overall automotive gross margin increased to 25.8%. That covers all three of their vehicles that they build. So that includes the current Model 3 production at its current capacity, which for Q2 was something along the order of like 4,000 units per week. And they said on the conference call that while they had guided for a Model 3 specific gross margin of 15% for the quarter, they just knocked it out of the park. They amazed themselves and they achieved over 20%. Now, over 20% were their exact words. They did not elaborate on how far over 20%. So that was really where the surprise beat on GAAP net profit came from, is from this much larger than expected gross margin on the Model 3. Now, in the past, if Tesla had guided for a 15% margin, people who are good at making models of this, people who have followed Tesla for a long time, might say something like, well, if they're guiding for 15%, maybe I'll pencil in 10% on the low end and 15% on the high end. And, I'll use those as bounding values in my model. So for them to report over 20%, that's why everybody's models were wrong.
Mm.
The next item was the sales, general, and accounting, which is historically an expense that grows in lockstep with their revenue. And in Q3, they managed to reduce the expenses of SG&A from $750 million to $729 million. So they cut $21 million off of that, which is what, like 3%. So that was really surprising because SG&A includes things like most expenses for labor, things like your engineering labor and stuff like that, but not necessarily your vehicle production labor. That'll be a cost of revenue on the vehicle itself. So a lot of your labor expenses and certainly a lot of your higher up management overhead labor costs go into there, but also costs from things like selling the cars. So operating the sales centers, the sales staff, all of the delivery costs of moving the cars from the Fremont factory to the end buyer, things like that. And so for their total car delivery to just a hair over double in Q3 over Q2, and yet their SG&A shrinks 3% was quite a surprise. So it's where some of the skepticism comes in. In late Q2, they had a big layoff. They reduced the workforce by about 9%. So that cut it from somewhere around 37,000 to something like 34,000 or 33,000. And that will somewhat come out of SG&A. Again, if some of those people were assembly line workers, that would then come out of the cost of revenues. But a lot of that you would expect to come out of SG&A. And so since they did that in late Q2, it would have all of Q3 to propagate through and save money. Elon made a very odd tweet late in Q3, and he said something about, oh, the great Tesla family, 45,000 employees. And it was very surprising. It was like, wait, you just went down to 35,000 employees near the end of Q2, and now you're at 45,000? And so people still don't really know what to make of that. The 10Q report released at the beginning of November does not reference the number of employees. I believe they have to state that in the annual, I think it's called a 10K report that they file once a year in January or February. They'll actually give an official head count then. So it was really surprising after he tweeted that essentially the workforce had bloated back up bigger than it was before. And then they delivered more than twice as many cars. Somehow they shrunk SG&A. And of course, the suspicion is always, well, they're just hiding some of those expenses elsewhere on the balance sheet.
Could the employee thing be addition of contractors?
I would imagine the contractors would be, oh, okay. I see what you're saying. You're saying the 45,000 employees is Tesla directs plus contractors plus, heck, maybe even people that you estimate only exist at sub-suppliers because of Tesla orders and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's a suspicion that I have. Again, the tweet was simply 45,000 strong or something like that. You know, it's very ambiguous. So they posted this $312 million profit. And in the shareholder letter given out on October 24th, they said they sold $52 million of ZEV credits. So those are those zero emission vehicle credits for California and about 10 or 12 other states. That number itself is pretty interesting because they've sold more in the past. Sometimes they sell none. It's always a big guess of how many they'll sell. 52 seems pretty weak, especially since they were trying to blow everything out of the park this quarter. There are a lot of good reasons why the ZEV credit market has gotten much weaker that revolve around other manufacturers producing more compliance cars relative to the number of ICE cars that they make. So the market has gotten weaker, and I suspect that 52 million is all they could sell because Tesla has so many ZEV credits now. They're swimming in them because every car they build generates several credits, and then they need zero credits because they produce zero internal combustion engine cars. So essentially a resource that the government wills into existence out of thin air, which Tesla does not need and can sell for money. And I think they sold very few or none in Q2. So they had all of the Q2 ramp up of the Model 3, which was 30-something thousand cars, plus all of the Q3 cars. So they're sitting on this giant pool, but they only sold $52 million worth. So my suspicion is that's all they could manage to sell, or it's everything at whatever price or whatever. Now, something that was not in the conference call or the quarterly letter was that they also sold an additional $137 million of other compliance credits. So there's other schemes that go on with zero emission vehicle compliance stuff that they get to sell the credits from to other manufacturers. So they made another $137 million in the quarter off of that. So, if we go back to this $312 million profit and we subtract the 52 million ZEV credit from a ZEV credit market that is weak and weakening more and whose very future is a little bit being talked about being in danger. And then we subtract another 137 million from these other credits. Already we're at just a bit over $100 million profit, subtracting out the government mandated credits. So another item that's very odd on the 10Q is that they point out they had a $115 million of accounts receivable from a single entity. And so it's odd that a single entity should owe them $115 million. So you think, what are the kind of entities that might purchase $115 million of anything from Tesla? And yeah, Blake's given me this really weird look, like he can't come up with anything.
The only thing I can come up with is you could have some kind of arrangement where your dealerships or some kind of fleet that's a different company purchase a bunch of cars from you. Like you have Tesla Rentals Inc. or something like that, and they buy the cars that Tesla actually leases. You could have some kind of factory thing going on.
So those were both good guesses. Tesla does operate in their China sales. They sell to a reseller. That's not what this is. What this is speculated to be a fleet sale. Now, Tesla has not actually come out and said that that's what it is. But there were several tweets and Reddit posts that came out throughout Q3 from people in different parts of the country who were Tesla owners, who basically all said the same thing. They took their Tesla into a service center to get it repaired. And when they went to the counter to get a loaner car, it turned out that they were now getting a loaner car from Enterprise instead of directly from Tesla. And some of these people additionally claim that the Tesla employee working at the service center, when queried about why Enterprise was doing this instead of it being a Tesla-owned car, said that Tesla had sold all of their service loaners to Enterprise and was now leasing them back on an as-needed basis. So you may remember that earlier this year and maybe some last year, I'd have to go back and look at, but Tesla made this decision that it would start using P100D Model S's and Model X's as service loaners. And really the reason was that they were under a contract to buy tons of batteries from Panasonic. There have been demand problems for the Model S and X for a long time. And so they had all these extra batteries that they needed to do something with. So they just built them into P100Ds and used them as service loaners for a while. And so they built up this huge, valuable, and rapidly depreciating fleet of expensive loaner cars. And now it appears that they've sold these off to Enterprise and they're leasing them back as needed for service loaners. And so that's what it's believed that $115 million in accounts receivable, as they say, from a single entity is.
I guess it amounts to something like 1,000 to 2,000 vehicles.
Yeah, that might be a reasonable guess. Yeah, if you looked up the number of service centers and you just took a stab at how many service loaners you thought each one might need.
Two to three.
I've read stories in the past of, even before the speculation that they had sold their service loaner fleet to Enterprise, I'd read stories that occasionally they would just run out of service loaners and they would just give you one from a rental company instead. So, they may not always have enough service loaners to always give you a Tesla. So it may be as few as 2 or 3, or maybe it's 4. I don't know. That'd be an interesting thing to know. I wish that I could have a job doing intelligence gathering like this all the time. Because that's the kind of information that I would try to go out and seek. Like, I would go to service centers and just look at them and try to figure out like what each of the cars was and which ones were service loaners. They're probably marked like Tesla service loaner, like a lot of dealerships do. But
How much would people have to contribute on Patreon to make intelligence gathering for Tesla become your full-time job?
it would be way too much. I would essentially have to have like a private patron who thought this was valuable enough to do, and then keep the information secret and make their own investment decisions based off of it. I think that's the only way you could make it worthwhile.
Well, if we have any super wealthy listeners.
Yeah. Hire Craig full time. So they had another $471 million of accounts receivable in excess of their Q2 accounts receivable. And they actually addressed this on the conference call. They basically said that because the quarter ended on a Sunday, there were a bunch of bank transactions that weren't processed. And I think that's plausible. The number seems all right. It seems a bit high, but depending on how they stack things up and how they may have been trying to blow out cars on the very last day of the quarter, I guess it's possible that a lion's share of that 471 million additional accounts receivable could just be explained by banks not processing on Sunday. Now, they also had a accounts payable increase of 570 million, which is rather bad. So it went from somewhere around $2.5 billion accounts payable owed to their suppliers to $3 billion. And if you think about what an account payable is, it's a deferred cost of revenue. So if you break that down, it means it's a cost of producing your product that you've not yet paid. And so when you look at the revenue statement and it has a certain, it has total revenues of somewhere around like $6 billion for the quarter and total cost of revenue of somewhere like 4 billion, I believe it was. I forget. You would need to add another $570 million to that because this was additional new cost of revenue that they've deferred paying during the quarter. So, if you take all of those items, you add the ones that are positive, like the additional accounts receivable that didn't count as revenue because they weren't processed, and you subtract the additional accounts payable because they're just stretching out the bills further. You discount the one-time items like the fleet sale, the speculated fleet sale, and you discount the government-mandated credits because the markets for those are getting weaker and weaker, and the markets themselves may not exist in the future. Your $312 million profit turns into potentially as much as a $91 million loss for the quarter. And so this, again, is all dependent on how you would choose to account each of these items and how much skepticism you may have about particular ones, especially the fleet sale. Because I've seen some good arguments that a fleet sale with a leaseback agreement would be accounted in some horribly complicated way that I don't even pretend to understand. So this is another place where if I could do this full time, I would just have like another finance guy who would come and answer these questions for me. I would love to do that. Have like a professional finance and accounting guy where I could just sit down and be like, I don't understand this thing.
I feel like if you wanted to be fair, I guess fair to Tesla, I don't know, you would account for all these one-time things as being spread out across all their quarters. So it would lift all those other quarters' losses a tiny bit, and then it would hurt this quarter a whole lot. Because, that's like a closer way to account for it.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people did when they were making their models of what they were guessing the results of Q3 would be, especially when it came to ZEV credits. Because Tesla is so inconsistent with how many ZEV credits it sells. And so what I saw in one model in particular that I recall was that they had taken like the previous 8 quarters of ZEV credit sales and just taken the average of that.
ZEV credits are interesting because if the market for them is truly going down, I don't know. It makes sense that it would. Like eventually it'll dwindle to zero, right? Then it seems like what Tesla's actually doing is sort of paying for what they believe will increase their share price because they're not selling them optimally to make the most money. They're selling them to produce the biggest quarter. And they're actually losing money in order to do that. So it sort of implies that they think boosting their stock a little bit this quarter is worth money. Like they're just paying cash to do it.
I would argue that there is value in boosting their stock they have the $920 million convertible bond that's due next March, I believe. And it converts at a stock price of, I believe, $360. And so if they can boost the stock price and keep it up through next March, then there's a lot of value in that. They can pay that $920 million bond off by diluting existing shareholders instead of by having to have the cash on hand.
That makes it make sense then.
And of course, you can make an argument against that theory that, well, March is a long way away. That's 4 months away. So a lot can happen to your stock price in 4 months. The other issue, though, I guess you could make a counter argument to that. And you could say that, well, if the stock price is hovering 340 or so like it is now, and it manages to maintain something in the range of, I don't know, 320 to 380, let's say it just kind of bounds at 360 pretty well for the next several months, it'll be really easy to create enough confidence in the market through some optimal tweeting to get it over 360 on the required day.
Taking Tesla private again.
Yes. Well, they've already said that the Model Y reveal will be, I believe, in February. So I think that's what they're going for. So needless to say, when you take those items out, you account for these other things, and you can make a claim at least, and then people can debate endlessly over its validity. You can at least make a claim that $312 million profit for the quarter may be, in actuality, as much as a $91 million loss. So that's the point I'm trying to make with all of these issues, is that there are a lot of these things hidden in the quarterly report, and especially hidden in the 10Q, that Tesla and all companies really have a lot of leeway to manipulate. And even manipulate is probably an unfair word there. They have a lot of leeway to just account for things in certain ways and then explain it or not. And it's this really gray area in accounting where, well, they can probably get away with it forever. Probably every company can. And it's just a matter of what their corporate philosophy is. But I think it's important to go through these exercises and show, here are all of these suspicious entries and all of these things that maybe you would account in another way to get a more accurate picture of Tesla's actual health. Let's say you take Tesla at face value and they made $312 million in profit, and Elon has guided that every quarter from now on will be profitable and cash flow positive, which is kind of silly because even giant mega companies don't make a profit every quarter. Well, most of them. I'm sure there's a few, but especially not companies that are in such capital intensive industries as auto manufacture. There's still a lot of problems that Tesla has to face. And a lot of these bigger issues that are out of their hands are still there. Interest rates are still rising. We're still running further and further and further into this record long bull market. Tesla is still dealing with executive flight from the company at unheard of rates. In 2017, they had 42 executives at the director and above level leave the company. And so far in 2018, with still 2 months to go, they've had 85 leave the company. So the rate of executive flight is more than doubled this year. Included among those have been 5 finance executives, the senior director and worldwide controller of revenue accounting, the VP of worldwide finance and operations, the chief accounting officer, the treasurer and VP of finance, and the chief accounting officer and corporate controller. So 5 high-level finance and accounting people have left the company this year, which is always speculated to mean that the books are being outright cooked by Elon and Deepak.
Maybe it was just to improve SG&A.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly does improve it, assuming that you don't backfill those positions or you promote someone and just give them a very modest raise to take on the responsibility. Then it improves SG&A a lot.
Yeah, instead of laying off factory workers, you lay off all your executives, and you save a ton of money by laying off very few people.
I've worked at companies in the past where I felt like that would be a solid strategy for improving things. And yes, I do think I could have run the place better than they did. Tesla also faces a constant problem with service center overloading, especially with the Model 3s. There's so many problems with the quality of Model 3s coming out of the factory. And this is an issue that's going to get worse at a very fast rate because they can't build additional service center capacity as fast as they're increasing the fleet of Model 3s and other Teslas.
Also, the fleet will keep increasing in age.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. I saw this really cool graph once of car maintenance over time. And so it's basically a bowl shape. And so when a car is newly manufactured, it typically needs more maintenance because there will be some error with manufacturing. And then it goes through this long period during its life where it doesn't need much, but then it just gets too damn old and it starts to need a lot of maintenance again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's the bathtub curve.
Yeah, there you go. I like that word better.
Yeah, that's well known for a lot of different types of manufacturing because, and arguably it happens to like living things. It's like, so you produce the thing, there all these random chance events go into creating it, and there's some chance of some of them being sort of like a killer. And so if it has these things, then it's like gone and it gets removed from the population. And then all you're left with is essentially healthy products, individuals, whatever. But then errors creep in and they can be either like killer or maintenance problems or whatever. And more errors creep in. And so the cost to like keep the thing around or stay alive or whatever goes up to essentially infinity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good analogy. I like that. I feel smarter. Thank you, Blake. So Tesla faces this problem with its service centers, and it's been a long time already since you've started seeing tweets and Reddit posts from people complaining that they have some problem with their Model 3 and the service center says they can't even take a look at it for several weeks. Stuff like that. So that's going to get worse at an ever-increasing pace. The mix of cars they sell, especially Model 3s, will be going down, as always. And we saw this with the Model S and the Model X. The number of buyers who are willing to pay, $120,000, $130,000 for a P100D Model S or X was rather small, as you would expect. And those buyers were exhausted quickly because they also tended to be the very enthusiastic people who are ready to buy right now. And so the number of people who would come along and say, I never thought of buying a Tesla, but now that I thought of it, I want to buy that $140,000 model, was pretty small. And they could nowhere near replace the initial surge of pent-up demand. The same thing's going to happen with the Model 3. This quarter where the best estimate I saw, the best data-driven estimate of average Model 3 sales price, because Tesla does not reveal that, was $62,000. That's not going to be repeated. That's a number that will go down quarter after quarter for quite a while until it more or less levels off, and then it'll just, there will be some noise in it after that. But that's another thing that drove very high gross margins for the quarter is they were selling things like a performance model, which is really just a software upgrade on top of the dual motor model.
So 62K is the average?
Yeah, I saw an analysis by a gentleman. He said that basically he hung out at the Tesla 3 owners forum for many, many weeks during the quarter. And they have some running polls that they do like every week of like, what options have you ordered? And so he just accumulated all of that data and then assigned the prices to them and did all of that. And so, that may even overestimate it a bit because if you're going to pay for a P whatever D, they don't call it a 100 with the Model 3, but I think they call it the Performance Model 3. But if you're going to buy that, you're probably more likely to be the type of person to join the Tesla Owners Club forum or the Model 3 forum or Teslarati or whichever one it was. So you're going to oversample high sales prices.
The main reason I was asking is because I think it's really funny that the average purchase price of a $35,000 car is $62,000.
Yeah, that's rather interesting. So
I like how they're also openly talking about like that they're not making the $35,000 car. They want to, and they're trying to get there, but actually they don't quite have a plan for it, which also implies that they never had a plan for it before.
Yeah, Elon Musk tweeted many months ago that building the $35,000 model would cause Tesla to die. And those were his words. And that they would have to get to a production rate of 5,000 per week, which they still have not sustainably achieved. And then they would need to sustain that 5,000 a week production rate for, I believe he speculated, 3 to 6 months, at which point they would probably have their margins to a point where they could build the $35,000 car. And if you go back and you look at comments on like Seeking Alpha articles and things like that from a year ago, people were being quoted that they would have their $35,000 car delivered in February of 2018. So yeah, the mix is an ongoing issue, but it's a current issue for Model 3 because Model 3 deliveries just really started in earnest in Q2. And so that's an issue they'll face an uphill battle against going forward. Now, some people will argue, but hey, they haven't started delivering to Europe or Asia yet. And that's true. And there will be buyers in Europe and Asia eventually who will want the performance version of the Model 3. And that will help the mix numbers short term. But buyers in Europe and Asia don't typically buy those types of upgrades in as great of a quantity as Americans do. They don't buy the giant batteries on their cars because they don't drive as much. And they don't buy the huge performance upgrades because they simply don't have as many places to use them. If you live in Paris and you need a car to commute around the city, you don't really care if it does 0 to 60 in 3 seconds.
Or were you listening to the conference call when Elon got the question about that?
No. I turned it off for a while because I had to go make dinner for my family. So
someone was like, what's the mix going to be in Europe? And he was like, we haven't thought about that at all.
Oh my God.
We've given no thought to that.
Such bullshit. I think they're terrified about the mix in Europe. I would be really worried about it because I would look at what the US mix is and discount it going forward and then make an additional discount for moving to Europe or Asia. And then look at what your margins really are after you know, when we talk about $570 million of increased accounts payable, and when you factor that in as being deferred cost of revenue, that brings down your gross margin. And so, you know, once you take all those little accounting oddities and you go back and you refigure what might of the real gross margin of the Model 3 have been, it may have been as low as 10%, maybe less. And so when you're looking at selling fewer and fewer performance and dual motor and large battery models in these foreign markets, that has to be terrifying because those are your upgrades that really have high margins. Performance has the highest margin, of course. And then the bigger battery after that has the next highest margin and then the dual motor. But so, yeah, I think it's total bullshit that he said that they haven't even thought about what the mix might be in Europe or Asia. And that would just be like a poor way of running your company to not have some guy who you point at and you say, hey, make an estimate of what this might be. So in addition to the service center and the car mix going forward, you have the cars sitting in the distribution and rework lots. And that was something that really came to light big in Q3. There were a lot of sleuths on the internet, mainly on Twitter, who were finding lots all over the country full of Teslas, mostly Model 3s, and they would observe them day to day. They'd do drone flyovers. They would do aircraft flyovers, in some cases like manned aircraft. And they would record how many cars were in these lots. I think some of this kind of intelligence gathering is kept pretty close to the vest. What I could find was there were at least 8 lots scattered around the country where these cars were being stored. And there was evidence that some of them that rework was being done, like new body panels being put on, probably to better match the paint colors. Things like the 12-volt batteries being replaced after they had worn down from sitting too long, and other issues being resolved with the cars. So whatever the reasons for all of that is, and certainly some of it is perfectly innocent. I mean, Tesla does not have enough land at the Fremont factory to batch their cars properly. So they have to produce the cars, move them off-site, then batch them for delivery to particular delivery centers. So, you know, there is perfect explanation for some of this activity. But when you see cars that are sitting there long enough that they're having to be recharged by giant diesel burning generators on site, and that their 12-volt batteries are wearing out, and that their paint is becoming damaged because they've sat out in the open air with the sand blowing around too long, then, you have to start thinking, how much of this is a problem and how much of it will hurt the company going forward? How much of this can they actually fix? In fact, Mark Spiegel posted on his Twitter account that some pictures he had obtained somewhere of a paint shop, I believe in California, that was repainting some brand new Model 3s. And whoever had taken the pictures and sent them to him had taken some pretty good close-up pictures, and you could see there was quite a bit of paint damage just from presumably sitting out in the desert in the blowing sand for too long. Additionally, going forward this month, November 2018, they owe $235 million of debt. Next month, December 2018, they owe $157 million of debt. And again, March of 2019, the big $920 million convertible bond is due that they absolutely must convert. They cannot afford to pay cash for that. They must have the share price over $360 per share and convert those to shares and just dilute the hell out of existing shareholders. But on the other side, there is good news going forward. So about a week or two ago, the investment firm Bally Gifford, which is the third largest holder of Tesla stock, they own 7.7% of the company, said that they would happily give Tesla more money if they needed it. And so there are definitely open lifelines out there for Tesla. Everything is not all terrible. They could just get more money and survive longer. They'll essentially be like the US government. They'll be bankrupt the day people stop giving them more money. Now, actually, speaking of Mark Spiegel, I saw an interview with him on Yahoo Finance, and it was from the day after the quarterly call. So it was October 25th. He pointed out a lot of these same things and a couple more, and a couple that he didn't have the luxury of knowing at the time because the 10Q hadn't been released. He pointed out, again, this would be the best quarter ever because of the mix. The mix was going to be getting worse forever. But he pointed out an estimate, I believe. I'm not sure if he has numbers to back this up. I'd actually be interested to know. But he said that Tesla underspent their OPEX by $50 million. And he elaborated a bit, and what I understood from that was that the SG&A number being so low was because they were basically not spending enough money on delivery services. And I think that kind of encompasses some of these problems of cars sitting in the desert instead of being in customers' hands, service centers being overloaded. There's been no shortage of tweets of people complaining that Tesla has rescheduled their Model 3 delivery 2 and 3 and 4 times. And so Tesla is not spending enough money to get the cars delivered. And I thought that was another interesting thing that maybe a little more speculative, or maybe I misunderstand it, that you could add into that $91 million loss. What if they had spent the extra money to not piss off so many customers? What would their numbers have looked like? And how long do you think that they can transfer goodwill of their customers into money on the income statement, which is essentially what they've done here by underspending on OPEX?
I guess a while longer.
Yeah, everybody has their own personal limit of what they'll take, and I would guess it can go on for quite a while, too.
I do know of someone who got rescheduled a couple of times, and they also offered if they would spend $11K more, they could get a dual motor or a performance one. I can't remember. And they could get it and in a specific color. And they're like, you could get it right now. And they were like, no, thanks. And they're like, okay, well, then it's delayed even more.
Penalty delay for not taking our offer you can't refuse.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty funny.
Mark Spiegel also pointed out his claim that Tesla was underspending on warranty reserve by $75 million because Model 3s are such lemons. And I would agree with that. Like I said, there's no shortage of videos on YouTube of people's Model 3s breaking down on the ride home from the delivery center. There's no shortage of people tweeting Elon Musk pissed off that they can't get their Model 3 looked at, or that the stupid little piece of fiberglass fabric on the bottom of the rear bumper got broken by driving through some water and the service center can't replace it for months. So, underspending warranty reserve is another place where the company could make the finances look better than they really are. Ultimately, Mark Spiegel's conclusion is that bankruptcy is probably off the table for Tesla, but now they're just a busted growth story. They don't have the cash to keep growing the way they have been. They can't get it. And that if you applied a proper automotive industry P over E value to their profits, you'd be looking at a double-digit stock price instead of $340 like they're at today. And he thinks that over the next year and a half to 2 years, you'll see a slow reversion to that kind of stock price as the true value of the company comes out. And that's where I disagree with him. I think bankruptcy is still an issue. I think that it could be several years, definitely. But when you have external factors like automotive industry slowdowns and recessions in their primary markets, which is the US and California, the company can be hurt a lot worse than they can sustain, I think. So I would say that before this quarter, I would guess that they had a 80 or 90% chance of going bankrupt eventually. And now I think it's probably 70 or 80%, but it's way further out there. And especially when you look at things like Bally Gifford saying that they would happily give Tesla more money. Well, it could take years and years and years, or it could take however long it takes to get into one good recession. And Mark Spiegel himself hedged his language there. He said bankruptcy is probably off the table. He didn't say it was off the table, but probably. But I'm going to disagree with that part. And again, Mark Spiegel did not have the luxury of viewing the 10Q report when he made all these statements. But I thought it was interesting. I wanted to point out the two things, the underspending on OPEX and the warranty under reserve that he brought to that interview. I thought those were valuable additions. Blake, do you have any questions?
Are you going to take up additional short positions against Tesla?
So I have no position currently. I sold all of my position upon the funding secured tweet. I was a weak hand who got shook out by Elon, and I took all my profits. I've made about $6,000 profit. So I haven't had a position since then. That was back in August. I've looked a lot at the January 2021 expiration puts betting against Tesla. I haven't found any yet at a good enough price that I liked, but I am looking to buy more of those, or to buy some of those. I haven't owned those in the past. I owned puts with different expiration dates.
Are you still going to buy $50 strike puts?
Probably, yeah. Because the thing is, the company doesn't have to go down below $50 a share on its stock price. The company can just kind of get in trouble, and the value of that put goes up because it represents a certain amount of risk to the company. It's only if you plan to exercise the put or let it expire worthless that you're entirely worried about the strike price. You can still make money off of puts even if they never get close to that strike price. The one thing that I really fear happening is that reporting such a large beat on profit, $312 million, when most people were guessing they would struggle to make 100, it's really taken the wind out of the sails of the entire financial press. I already see fewer articles being written about Tesla, fewer people diving into things. There's fewer activity of the people on Twitter who are doing their own intelligence gathering. It's kind of like, they were all getting excited that, hey, it'll go bankrupt, and it'll be this exciting event and they'll be vindicated. And now that we see that they can engineer a profit for a quarter, and Bally Gifford says we'll give them billions more dollars, it really took the wind out of their sails. And I fear that kind of intelligence work will not continue. And so we'll lose the insights that those people were contributing.
Yeah, probably.
That's part of why I say I wish I could do that full time. I wish I could have a job doing that and then have a budget and a small, not like a staff, but maybe one or two other people helping me who had their own skill sets to do that. Tesla is in a particularly vulnerable position with respect to outside intelligence gathering because its products are registered with governments. And a lot of those records are public in parts of the world. And so it's very hard for them to hide exactly how much they're selling and who they're selling to and what things they're selling, because their product is so regulated.
Yeah.
And so the other thing is it's a big car. It's not exactly something that hides too easily. That's how people found these at least 8 storage and rework lots scattered around the country. People would just be driving by and notice there were hundreds of the same car parked there. And then they'd stop and they'd realize, oh, it's hundreds of Model 3s. And then eventually somebody who realized the significance of that would drive by and see them. And so it's a vulnerability that Tesla has in particular, just based on its product, that you could exploit with a concerted intelligence gathering effort.
They could be more sneaky. They could always put them in lots that are fenced opaquely, or garages or whatever. Put a tarp over each one of them.
That'd be great for the paint.
I don't know. It might pay for itself. Yeah.
I don't know. The other thing I wonder about is how much money could like an investment firm spend on this kind of intelligence gathering and really expect it to pay off? Or what would their parameters for that equation be, you know?
That's a really difficult problem to solve.
Yeah.
What is the value of information? I
Yeah.
feel like if you were one of the larger shorts on Tesla, you might be interested.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you had a really big long position on Tesla. But other than that, it has to sway like hundreds of millions of dollars, probably.
I wonder if someone could put together this kind of intelligence gathering operation and then just offer to sell the results under NDAs to investment firms.
Yeah, people do that.
Yeah.
There are companies that'll sell you a report, and the report might cost like $100,000 or something like that. But it's something where you're deciding whether to spend $1 billion or not.
Yeah, I've seen some limited cases of things like that before. Do you have any other questions?
No, I don't think so.
So I guess I'll just summarize. I don't think everything is rosy. It'll always be interesting to see the Q4 results and the quarter after that and the quarter after that, to see how Model 3 demand holds up in the US, to see what the mix is in Europe and Asia, to see when exactly they start exporting to Europe. Elon on the conference call said that I believe they would not be consummating any sales in Europe until at least Q1 of 2019. So I don't take these things at face value that it's all going great and Tesla's going to be a runaway success anymore. They still have a lot of challenges ahead. They still need to be performing perfectly and get lucky.
Yeah.